Thanks for joining us today for this episode of the Sophisticated Fiduciary. I'm joined once again by Alison Bettonville from CAP STRAT. Hi, Alison.
I will.
And today we've got a lot of great headlines. It's been a busy month and there's a lot of things to talk about. And I think first, Alison, let's start by going over the top headlines. The first one on the docket today is about the Secure Act 2.0, which just recently passed the House Ways and Means Committee.
Unanimously, nonetheless, or at least this bill is being termed Secure Act 2.0. It's really called Securing a Strong Retirement, or SSRA, but it's really seen as a successor to the Secure Act that passed at the end of 2019 and continuing a lot of the themes that bill started.
And what are the key elements in that bill that are of interest? I mean, we're early, obviously, in the process, but what are the key elements that jumped out at us when looking at the bill?
Yeah, I think we should look at this as the train is leaving the station and it's starting to move full steam ahead down the tracks. And there are a lot of important elements in this bill. The broad theme continues to be expanding coverage, expanding access to retirement plans to those that don't otherwise have access to a workplace savings plan, especially through encouraging small businesses to sponsor plans. But relative to the Secure Act, we actually think there are more provisions in this bill that will have a meaningful impact on existing retirement plans. So, probably the biggest one that's going to catch some eyes is the requirement that all catch up contributions be Roth contributions or after tax. So, no more tax preference on those additional contributions for those who are age 50 or older, but also some ability for those who are 62, 63, or 64 to save a little bit more. I think those are probably the biggest impacts, especially for individuals that are in existing plans.
So what you're saying is those individuals of those ages would have the ability to add even more than the normal catch up.
Exactly, looking at about $10,000 initially versus the current about 6,500.
Yeah, all these things sound really interesting. It's going to be it remain to be seen how they get implemented and who's responsible for all these calculations. So it'd be quite a nice period of um, debate as to what makes it into the final bill.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, there is a lot of bipartisan support here. Again, certainly seeing the bill unanimously exiting the Ways and Means Committee is a strong sign of the support that Congress may be able to pass this outright. A lot of the provisions in this bill have been introduced in bills in the Senate as well, so there's pretty good support there. But like all retirement plan legislation, should this bill pass this year, there are some things that would potentially be effective next year, but we'd be looking at a year or two while we're getting guidance and regulations before a lot of the provisions are fully implemented.
That's great. Any other key provisions that we see in the bill?
You know what? The one that's probably going to get the most headlines is a requirement that any new 401k or 403b style plan that is started use automatic enrollment. It's not going to apply to existing plans, but I think is a clear sign about at least what the government thinks is most effective as far as retirement plan features.
And we've seen automatic enrollment is it's a big win for any plan.
Yeah.
Do we know, like generally speaking, if there's going to be any provision related to a starting deferral rate in those plans?
Minimum of 3%, maximum of 10%. And it looks like if you use something like 3%, there may be a requirement to increase participants up to 10%. So, and definitely would agree, we have seen these as highly effective features, but being required for the first time is a pretty big step as far as moving the needle on plan design and what is compliant.
Any other key provisions you want to mention here?
Another key headline is probably going to be around RMDs, increasing the age for RMDs. The Secure Act bumped that from 70 and a half to 72. Secure 2.0 is going to bump that or try to bump that to 75, but do that over a period of years. That is kind of an expensive provision. And again, there's a couple ways they're going to pay for that. One is having catch-up contributions be Roth. Another is an option for employees to elect to have their matching contributions be on a Roth basis. So a little unclear exactly how that's going to work, but the government seems to think that lots of people would opt into that and they'd raise some revenue that way too.
And that, I guess, the big question I would have is, would corporations or any company get a deduction still for that match contribution?
Most likely, as long as somebody is paying taxes on it at some point, that's kind of what the government's going for. And, one of the things that is often difficult from a budget perspective about looking at changes, there's been rumors that Biden wants to change the 401k tax deduction to a tax credit. And one of the challenges around any types of changes like that is the fact that, the 401k system, it's not really a tax avoidance scheme, it's just a tax deferral scheme. And so when you look at something like saying, oh, these matching contributions that were going to be taxable to somebody in retirement when they had grown in the plan plus earnings, now we're going to tax those today, that's great for revenue today, but that's just stealing revenue from the future. So, it's all about the assumptions that are made in the budget process, but these aren't tax avoidance situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of other little things in this bill, and whether they make it to the end or not will remain to be seen. So we'll
Sure.
follow this and do a deeper dive on this in future
Mhm.
episodes. But I guess encouraging signs that we're getting a lot of bipartisan support in the retirement space still.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of ideas in here that have been percolating for a long time. So great to see them potentially moving closer to crossing the finish line.
Awesome. So let's move on to the next news item, which is related to the DOL guidance that was just recently issued on rollovers, and talk about that and maybe a little bit on the SEC's version of this and perhaps what might be next here.
Yeah, absolutely. So the DOL has been busy. They put out this specific guidance with respect to the new regulation on fiduciary advice that was issued at the end of 2020. And really clarifying and providing more guidance for financial service professionals on how they take advantage of what's called a prohibited transaction exemption if they don't want to be fiduciaries when talking with participants. And really a lot of focus here on rollovers. The regulation and the guidance isn't exclusively about rollovers, but that's kind of the big headline here. And one of the major goals of this regulation is to make it really clear that if a financial service professional is dialoguing with an individual investor and they are talking about moving a balance from a qualified retirement plan to an IRA where the financial service professional is going to earn compensation, the bar has been raised to really have it very clear when a financial service professional needs to be a fiduciary for that transaction. I think one of the biggest areas they're trying to give some meat here is requiring a written recommendation that clearly states why that transaction is in the individual's best interest.
Mhm.
So pretty high standard there relative to, there's a long history in this industry of concern about individual advisors, primarily brokers, soliciting participants to roll their balances out of plans and into high cost IRAs. A lot of plan administrators have sad stories about things they have seen in their own companies, and that's exactly what this regulation is really trying to get in front of.
And generally speaking, is that really the driver of this? Like what's some of the other reasons why they're looking to really enforce a little bit more diligence here?
I think that's a big reason. The idea of keeping assets in plans where they are overseen by corporate fiduciaries, generally benefit from lower costs, where participants have some asset protections, are all driving factors behind this regulation.
But a lot of corporate plans might not have the argument against it is they don't have the investment alternatives or product to facilitate individuals either protecting their assets or drawing down their assets properly. Is that a fair statement?
I think it is. And, there certainly are plenty of ways where we will see service providers, financial service providers who offer IRA products or advisory services, finding reasons why they believe that working with them is in the participant's best interest. I think that idea of the investment flexibility is a big one. Can be a little subjective, but it is a very fair statement that I think defined contribution plans have primarily been designed for accumulation, both with the investment alternatives and even tools and plan features and flexibility on withdrawals. in such a way that it is very fair that someone near retirement may benefit from an IRA where they have more flexible withdrawal options. But that's also an area we think is going to be changing a lot in the next probably 5-ish years in the defined contribution plan landscape.
So you're saying we'll see plans adopt decumulation strategies, annuity strategies,
Mhm.
alternative investment strategies to sort of balance out what's available outside of plans?
Absolutely. And, it's an interesting point of discussion today. I think there are a lot of financial service providers, retirement plan service providers that have an inherent belief that when someone is at that retirement phase, they really need to work directly with an advisor. So I think a big idea is going to be, can we create DIY solutions here?
Mhm.
Can we make it as simple as we did with accumulation? There's been so much success through automatic enrollment, automatic increase, defaulting people to target date funds. Is there a way to recreate that experience on the decumulation side? Or is it just too complex? There's too many decisions and we can't give people an easy button, in which case maybe the answer is they need to work with somebody, whether that's inside the plan or outside.
Yeah. And the SEC is looking at all this also, and they should be coming together in the
Mhm.
future as to finalizing a set of rules that everyone can follow. And I will more information to come on this particular topic, but for now, I think from our standpoint, we think this is a great idea and should benefit participants in the long run, as long as it's not overwhelmingly complicated and confusing to participants, which will also lead to bad decisions. So more to come there. Let's move on to the next topic for discussion today, and that is ESG. And the SEC came out with some information regarding ESG. So why don't you let us know what they've said here?
Yeah, ESG has been a very hot topic of conversation, not just in the retirement plan industry, but in the investment management industry more broadly. And, one of the recent headlines from the SEC that we thought was really notable to be aware of is the fact that they are not currently planning on regulating the term ESG. They have noted and have kind of cautioned investors that it's really a marketing term, and that investors should be a little bit wary and really should be investigating if a fund manager or an investment advisor is saying, oh, this is an environmentally conscious strategy or socially responsible investment, that doesn't have any teeth to it in and of itself. And there really does need to be some consideration of what does that mean on the individual product level, versus just relying blindly on a representation by an investment professional.
And what is a fiduciary's position here with respect to evaluating ESG and considering it? I'm sure, like a lot of our clients, they're getting questions about ESG. What should they be thinking about here?
Mhm. Sure. So, we are seeing those questions come from many different angles. And so I think there's a number of different considerations. First, want to recognize that there was a new regulation that was finalized under the Trump administration, not being enforced, but does still exist. And in that regulation, the financial factors for selecting plan investment options, the regulation says that fiduciaries should only consider financial factors when they are selecting options for defined contribution plan participants. The fundamental premise here is that if fiduciaries are prioritizing social factors, they could be sacrificing investment return or taking on more risk. So there are things that fiduciaries have to be cognizant of. And, at the end of the day, regulation or not, going back to the fiduciary standards, making sure that we're selecting investment options that are in participants' best interest. We're doing it for participants, not for some other purpose. We're being mindful that fees are reasonable, and that we're remaining diversified. Those things are absolutely possible to accomplish with a socially responsible investment option. We just can't sacrifice any of those things to pursue ESG.
Mhm.
And it is worth noting, I mean, there's been a fair amount written recently about the fact that investment managers who've seen their fees beaten down with index funds in recent years are seeing ESG as a way that, hey, we can market this product as ESG. People are interested in that and they're willing to pay more for that than they will for an index fund. So being mindful of a lot of those trends is really important. And we think the conversation should start with kind of the question of why. If a fiduciary was pursuing a socially responsible investment option for a defined contribution plan. Why are we pursuing that? What do we want to accomplish? What's the objective? We recognize and have seen a lot of ESG be very performative in nature. We're doing this because somebody wants us to, and we need to demonstrate our commitment to social responsibility. That's fine. Let's recognize why we're doing it and make sure that we can accomplish a certain objective by offering that fund. Or if there is a very specific, desire from participants are looking to express a certain view, that we can make sure we're addressing the actual concern or need when taking action.
Great. That's a great update. And obviously more to come because we're in the early innings of the whole ESG movement here. So let's move on to our last topic. We're going to go a little deeper here. Relatively timely with respect to the Colonial Pipeline cybersecurity tech that's sort of holding the fuel lines hostage in the Northeast here. Let's talk about the Department of Labor cybersecurity guidance that just came out.
Yep. Yeah. So the other key focus for the DOL has been providing guidance to fiduciaries on what is their responsibility with respect to cybersecurity. They're overseeing a defined contribution plan. So as we dive in, I think where we really want to start the conversation is acknowledging what are the primary cybersecurity risks that a defined contribution plan may face. And first key comment is really the source of all of these risks is the partnership with a third-party administrative services provider, both through the exchange of data, maintenance of data on their system, and processing of transactions. We really think about those cybersecurity risks in these three buckets, the system itself and the availability of data. There certainly are attempts to and risks that there could be a wholesale hack of a third-party provider's system. Someone could take down that system. In some respects, it's not all that different than, I think, a classic risk that's been evaluated for many, many years on kind of disaster recovery plans. What happens if your primary facility is hit by a hurricane? What happens if everyone has to work from home in a global pandemic? What happens if the system goes down? Bringing into that conversation as well information security, recognizing that there are a lot of individuals who are employed by these organizations. There are a lot of people who may have access to that data, and that there could be, either an internal or external breach that would result in theft of plan data. And then that idea of transaction processing, this is where we really see the most risk of fraud on the participant level, that a third-party actor is able to contact the administrative service provider, request specifically a distribution, that's what we're worried about here, right? The money leaving, and have that distribution successfully processed.
And how to take us through how that type of breach works or could work.
Sure. There's a number of different ways. Many, many plans these days offer the ability to request a distribution either online or via phone. So online, one key risk is if someone's never set up their account and a bad actor is able to, register the account, process the distribution simply by going on, registering that account for the first time. If somebody's able to guess the password and get into someone's account and process that online. Via phone, it's a lot about how is a caller authenticated. I could call up and say, "Hi, my name is Will Woodall," and what's going to happen? Are they going to know, doesn't sound like Will Woodall, or are they going to process that transaction if I know enough personal information about Will to get through that security test?
Yeah, so that's there are those types of risks. What type of safeguards, non-system safeguards, do record keepers put in place to protect that?
I think one of the really important things as we start to talk about what's in the DOL guidance, that's definitely an important theme that was communicated through this DOL guidance is, it's not just what's the technology, but also what is the training for the individuals? What are the processes that a call center representative is supposed to follow? And how does the service provider actually make sure that the call center reps are following those processes? How do they audit that? It's not just do you do ethical hacking, do you have people try to break into your system, but are the call center reps properly, validating contact information from callers? Are they asking the right questions in order to really test the identity of the person who's calling in?
And I guess the question that I think about is, and I'm sure a lot of our plan fiduciaries think about, is what is my responsibility to oversee what the record keeper is doing, processing these transactions, and what liability do I have if there is a breach here and somebody's account is emptied?
And that's really kind of the crux of what the Department of Labor is trying to accomplish with this guidance, and fundamentally saying, yes, fiduciaries do have some responsibility to monitor cybersecurity. And that's part of a fiduciary's responsibility to prudently select and monitor third-party service providers. And that's exactly what they gave guidance on. What are the best practices for a fiduciary to carry out that monitoring process? And as we think back to what the fiduciary standards are, it's acting in participant best interest, and it's having a process. So at the end of the day, we don't see a case or believe there would be any liability to a fiduciary for a breach, as long as the fiduciary can demonstrate that they went through a process to validate that there was appropriate cybersecurity in place. And as we dig into the guidance here, we can kind of talk about what that process could look like for fiduciaries. So we can think of the guidance really in two big buckets. The first bucket is just asking questions. What are the topics that fiduciaries should be considering and asking about when they're reviewing cybersecurity? And then the second one is more contractual in nature, reviewing some of those key terms and provisions. A couple details in each bucket. The DOL guidance has 6 components. The first 4 really fall under that ask questions, starting with the systems themselves, asking about the information security protocols and practices with an emphasis on third-party audits, what kind of audits are conducted, who's auditing. The second component is around that idea of the practices. How is the service provider monitoring those that are on the front lines of things like validating distributions? The next set of questions are kind of interesting in coming down to prior breaches and responses. The third point really suggests asking about track record of past security incidents. And then the fourth point around the responses to those incidents. I got to tell you, in our experience, when you ask service providers about these, they say, "Oh, we don't really track and report that." Nobody's all that excited to tell you about these things. So I think that's something that fiduciaries should definitely kind of be on alert for, perhaps push for a little bit more information. On the contracts bucket, insurance is a big one, and that comes in the fifth tip, reviewing what insurance policies the provider carries that would come into play in a cybersecurity incident. And then the contract itself, something we've recognized here is oftentimes record keeping relationships are very long-term relationships. And even if a record keeping relationship's only been in place for 3 or 5 years, cybersecurity is a space that has evolved a lot. So maybe worth just asking your provider, hey, can we just restate our contract? Give me your most recent terms,
Mhm.
because a contract that's 5 to 10 years old maybe didn't even contemplate cybersecurity in the way that we think about it today.
That's a great point. What considerations should they be asking their auditors who audit these plans to
Mhm.
include in these reviews?
We definitely are seeing and do see auditors asking for some of this information, especially around information security, and around systems, asking for things like, SOC reports to have in the audit files. But also recognizing that, while plan fiduciaries generally are not cybersecurity experts, probably your plan auditor isn't a cybersecurity expert either. But that may be an area that evolves in coming years, where we see, different professionals coming in to participate in those audit teams that do have some focus in that area and ability to add some value there.
And so, this cybersecurity is definitely a complicated topic. And as a fiduciary, I might not be personally knowledgeable of really what to
Mhm.
do here. Um, I might have someone in my company that does, but maybe I don't. What are the things that I should be considering as potential actions?
So part of the expectations from the DOL is, one are, validating that the service provider is using recognized standards, the types of audits that they're having conducted are standard. And that's something, plan auditor could perhaps advise on, or even an advisor can tell you, what's common in the industry. Comparing some of these protocols to industry standards or other providers is another great tool and resource. As far as how fiduciaries do that, we've got a couple of suggestions as far as how, a committee may pursue this. Conducting a dedicated review of cybersecurity is never a bad idea, but there's a lot of different forms that can take. At this point, most of our committees have had their relationship manager from their record keeper speak multiple times about cybersecurity. That's a great checkbox. There certainly may be a desire or willingness to go a little bit deeper, and recognizing that a relationship manager is also not a cybersecurity expert. Leveraging internal expertise, someone from an IT team who really has more subject matter expertise and can interpret some of the processes and systems. And folks from legal as well that can look at contracts and weigh in on some of those terms and provisions. We're seeing a lot of those types of reviews conducted on behalf of the committee and then reported back. It's always appropriate for fiduciaries to, leverage other resources to inform them. And, as long as the fiduciaries have validated that those resources have subject matter expertise and knowledge, they can certainly rely on that.
Well, that's great. Great summary of this complicated topic. And I know we talk with our clients and help them with these types of audits and process enhancements throughout the year. It, in conclusion, anything else you should suggest fiduciary should consider here?
Participant communication is not a bad idea either. Certainly, if participants are doing the things they need to do to protect their account with registering their accounts, having strong passwords, using multi-factor authentication, that's going to reduce the risk of fraud and perhaps even reduce a need to rely on the cybersecurity provisions.
That's great. Well, thanks for this great update, Allison. And thank you all for watching on this episode of the Sophisticated Fiduciary, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.